I figured it out. I figured out the Nolan Wells timeline. I know how they messed with the GPS. I figured it all out. I figured out the lies that are based in truth. I figured it all out, and I've got proof. But stick with me because it's going to be a long video, y'all. Now, I found a 15-page Marine Patrol report that had lots of little details that prove that the boys had been lying. So I've already shown how at 1:30 in the morning, the initial Lieutenant Odom with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office said that his deputies spoke with several of the friends who traveled to the island on the vessel with Nolan. And they said that he left in the company of an unknown female and that he chose to remain on the island.
So what was the next step? Did you guys ever engage with police? Or
Yeah, so the first time I talked to police was July 7th. I talked to the lead investigator, and I told him my whole story top to bottom. Dot every I, crossed every T. I told him everything I knew, every little detail.
Well, that's a lie now, isn't it, Warren? Because you talked to them at 1:30 in the morning that night. I mean, did you just forget to tell the cops about Katie? Because it's not like you didn't know it was her or you didn't know how to get in contact with her.
the girl that he was with, Katie, had texted somebody that she heard people yelling.
Correct.
Nolan yelling.
Yeah, and I have a picture of that. She texted my buddy, and the next day everybody was panicking. Everybody's texting Katie, because she was obviously seeing Nolan the whole day at the island. Katie sent a message to my buddy the next day and said, this last time I saw him, he's really sweet. But she also mentioned that the last time she saw Nolan was when my buddy was yelling at him to get on the boat.
Katie says that she assumed that she went on the boat after y'all were yelling at him. And let's not forget that the last time you saw him was 3.
Well, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms.
And yet for some reason around noon, the name of another girl who hadn't even seen Nolan in a year was given to the patrol to go interview, saying that she was with that group, not Katie. They also gave the name of a couple of other friends who they weren't able to get in contact with. And despite having a picture of a text message from Katie, funny how you didn't share that with Officer Tatum. Probably could have cleared up some stuff real quick, right? Now let's get to the data. Now, at about 1:30 on July 5th, they were doing a flight of drones based on the relation of the last known anchor position of the Atkinson vessel, which I have documented right here. 4:30, Officer Strickland contacted Jennifer Pyrone, who was Wyatt's mother, who told them that he had already spoken to officers earlier in that day, but they were happy to cooperate with any investigation. And she let this officer take a picture of the GPS. Officer Strickland observed the track line showing Pyrone's vessel location on Horn Island, then gave coordinates. I'm going to need you to remember this exact phrasing. It's going to be important later on. Now, this was the GPS coordinates from the picture that the officer took, meaning that these coordinates had to be a different one that was verbally given over the phone by Wyatt. And you'll notice they're quite different. Now, you'll notice that this incident report says the involved entities are Bart Edmington and Jerry Adkerson, not Wyatt. Even though Wyatt is 18, he should be on this report. And you could argue that they were just giving the names of the people that owned the boats, but somehow I doubt that 21-year-old Bart owns that boat. You'll notice on this report that 2 different pieces of GPS evidence were collected. So now we're going to go to the July 8th report where they came and they took those GPS coordinates from both the Adkerson boat and Bart's boat. Yellow is Bart, blue is the grandfather Jerry. The same Jerry that called and canceled the sea tow as the sea tow phone call was being made. Now, mind you, this is 3 days after the police had come and spoken to the mother and gotten the GPS coordinates. Now, Bart had a germane GPS map chart plotter. Jerry's boat also contained a germane GPS map chart plotter. Now, I had to look up the difference between waypoints, tracks, and routes. So waypoints mark specific spots. Routes connect them in a planned order, and tracks record your actual path. Now, according to that GPS data, there is no movement from 11 to 4:30, but we know that that's not true. Warren has never been able to logically explain how they ended up so far away from the shore. Because according to him, he said at 3 o'clock, that was the last time he saw Nolan, Bart was trying to yell at him to get on the boat. His brother got into a fight, so he got his brother to come over there. That's when he saw that it was all sinking, because he said this.
There's a lot of people on, so it drags water in. And eventually, I think over time, we were out there for a couple hours. The boat just started filling up with water. So I popped the starboard side hatch and the battery the battery was completely underwater.
Yes, but according to Warren, he had just seen Nolan, like, neck deep, cradling a girl at the boat next to them. So how did they end up in 31 feet of water at the 4 o'clock call? There's an hour in between that. If the battery is submerged, how would they even get away from the sandbar? You can see in the background of this picture, they are far away from people. And yet this GPS is saying that you were stationary the whole time. But why? Especially because we have actual fucking proof right here. We have the coordinates that Wyatt's mom gave them the second time, and the cop took a picture of the GPS. Compare it to the GPS coordinates in which they were trying to get a tow from. But what if I were to tell you that not only does a waypoint need to be physically saved on this exact type of GPS, you have to intentionally say, mark this spot, or else it doesn't automatically save. It records your tracks automatically, but those are just saved coordinates. And it turns out you can actually delete tracks. It's super easy. You just go into the main menu and you delete it off of your data. So why is this GPS data, which is right here, so much further away than what the GPS says it is later? There is no data included in that GPS report that explains them going from here to here, unless someone went in and deleted those tracks. Because they probably dropped that waypoint once they anchored, which would explain why Warren said they showed up at 10:30 and the GPS says that they showed up after 11. And so then it wasn't until half an hour after the canceled tow that they dropped another waypoint. And mind you, the exact same GPS was used in both boats, and Wyatt/Jerry's boat has the tracks and routes where Bart's does not. And again, it tracks it automatically. So you have to intentionally delete those tracks. And why did they do that? Well, it turns out Jerry Atkinson just so happens to be the owner of Ocean Marine Group in Ocean Springs and Gulfport, which is literally a boat dealer. So guess who's gonna know that information? We already know Grandpa Jerry was in the mix, because the only way that he could have canceled the sea tow before it even started to head out is if Wyatt had called Jerry first and Jerry told him to call for a sea tow and then canceled it for him, which would explain why he couldn't give any descriptions of where the water was. How high was it? We know that the sea tow did not bring in the boat. In fact, Bart's mother came on Facebook and said that there are pictures from my son's boat of the boat about to be towed, which is clearly who is about ready to tow them here, as Wyatt is on the phone. I can tell you 100% that this is not a sinking boat. You can see Bart bringing them in this picture. But Bart was supposedly the one yelling at Nolan to get on the boat, remember? Why would he be yelling at Nolan to get on a boat that's sinking? Unless he was telling Nolan to get on his boat. And Warren accidentally explained what really happened with the engine. Whatever happened with Nolan happened on Bart's boat, allegedly, which is why all of Bart's information was deleted. So here's what happened. Both this one and this one confirmed that there was a fight that broke out on the beach. Started out with him, ended up with Warren's little brother. His uncle says, we gotta go. They hop on a boat and they leave. He grabs his drunk younger brother and says, we're getting out of here too. 3 o'clock, this whole caravan is trying to get the hell out of there because they're drunk and fighting. Wyatt's boat was in such a hurry that they couldn't figure out how to put the freaking trim down, which caused the motor to overheat, quickly stranded them, and Bart had to come help them. The time that Bart shows up, something has happened between him and Nolan. They're all distracted trying to fix the bilge pump because it didn't trim down. The waves were crashing over the boat and into the bilge pump, short-circuiting it. During this, some people have figured out that Nolan is gone. Other people just think that he's passed out or something, which is why Wyatt calls his grandfather to figure out what the F to do. And as the phone call is being made, more people are figuring out something's wrong with Nolan. That's why they didn't start moving again for 30 minutes. They were coming up with a plan and figuring out how to make it work. I've run out of time, but don't worry, I'm doing a follow-up to this video with more details, more information. And if you like my work, be sure to show your support in my bio.
He went out on a boat with the people he trusted most. 2 days later, he was gone. And now, a piece of leaked audio has the internet asking one question. Did his friends know exactly what happened to him? If you're new here, this is the show where we lay out the facts, the timeline, and the theories, without the noise. Welcome to Pioneer's Diary. Here you get daily true crime updates. Today we're going deep into the case that has taken over true crime corners of the internet for weeks now, the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells. We're going to walk through everything, Who Nolan was, what happened on that boat trip to Horn Island, what investigators have said, what his family and their attorney have said, what his friends and their attorneys have said, and what this newly circulated, enhanced audio actually claims to capture. We're also going to talk about the theories swirling online, including the claims made by various commentators and creators, and we're going to be very careful to separate what has actually been confirmed from what is still speculation. This is a case where a lot of people have already made up their minds. Our job today is different. Our job is to lay out the timeline as clearly as we can, point out exactly where the evidence is solid and where it is not, and let you draw your own conclusions. So grab something to drink, settle in, because this one is long, and there is a lot of ground to cover. Before we get into the disappearance itself, it's worth taking a moment to talk about who Nolan Wells actually was, because in cases like this, the person at the center of it all can sometimes get lost underneath the noise of theories, hashtags, and viral clips. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal town along the Gulf. Those who knew him describe him as warm, easygoing, and deeply loyal to his friend group. The kind of young man who, according to people close to him, would go out of his way for the people he cared about. Friends who have spoken publicly, including one identified in interviews as Shepherd, have described Nolan as the sweet guy, someone who brought a tight circle of friends together and kept them close. According to those same friends, the group had been inseparable for years, spending summers together, and treating each 4th of July as something of a tradition, a group trip out to the Barrier Islands off the Mississippi coast. Nolan had just finished high school and, according to reporting on the case, was getting ready for the next chapter of his life, with family members describing him as someone with plans and ambitions for his future. He was, by all accounts, well-liked in his community. That context matters because it's part of why this case exploded online the way it did, not just because of the mystery surrounding his death, but because of who he was to the people around him, and because of the questions his family has been asking from day one about how such a well-liked young man could end up dead after a group outing with people who called themselves his closest friends. It's also worth noting, because it has become a significant thread in the public conversation around this case, that Nolan was black, and that his death occurred in a group setting where race has become part of the broader public debate, something we'll come back to later in this video, because attorney Ben Crump, who has represented families in a number of high-profile cases involving black victims, has been vocal about wanting answers, and has drawn comparisons to other cases in his public statements. Now let's talk about the day everything started. On the 4th of July, Nolan joined a group of friends for what was described as a fairly typical boat trip to Horn Island, a barrier island off the coast of Mississippi in the Gulf, accessible only by boat, and known locally as a popular spot for holiday gatherings, especially around Independence Day. Horn Island itself is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a stretch of undeveloped coastline, sandbars, and open water that draws boaters every summer, particularly around the holiday, when the water is full of families and groups celebrating. According to available reporting, Nolan traveled out to the island with a group of friends, the kind of gathering that, on paper, sounds like nothing more than a group of young people spending a holiday together on the water, swimming, relaxing, celebrating. What we know, based on statements from authorities and from the friends themselves, is that at some point on that day, the group made the decision to head back to the mainland, and Nolan did not return with them. According to officials, Nolan reportedly stayed behind on the island when the rest of the group left. This is one of the central and most debated points in the entire case. Why would a group of friends leave the island without Nolan? Was it planned? Was it a miscommunication? Did something happen on the island that led to that decision? These are the questions that have fueled online speculation for weeks, because the public narrative from the very beginning has hinged on this detail. The idea that Nolan was, in some way, left behind by the very friends he trusted. It's important to state clearly here, because this is where a lot of online commentary starts to drift into pure speculation. The exact sequence of events on Horn Island that day has not been laid out publicly with full clarity by investigators. We know the group went out. We know Nolan reportedly did not leave with them. Beyond that, most of what circulates about what really happened on the island comes from secondhand accounts, social media posts, and reactions to leaked material, not from an official, confirmed account released by law enforcement. As the group made their way back toward the mainland, according to multiple reports, the boat they were traveling on began taking on water. This is a detail that becomes extremely significant later in the case, because it's tied directly to the piece of audio that has caused such an uproar online. According to reporting, one of the teenagers on the boat placed a call to a private boat towing company, a service that assists boaters in distress, essentially a roadside assistance equivalent for the water, as the vessel began to take on water during the return trip. That call, made to the towing company, was later obtained and has become the center of the entire leaked evidence storyline that so many creators, including the one referenced in the title of this video, have been covering. We'll get into exactly what that audio allegedly contains in a few minutes, because it deserves its own full breakdown. But for now, the key point is this. The boat carrying Nolan's friends back from Horn Island ran into trouble on the water, took on water, and the crew called for help. Nolan, according to the same reporting, was not on that return trip. With the group back on the mainland and Nolan not among them, the timeline moves into what officials have described as a search and recovery situation. Nolan was reported missing, and according to available reporting, authorities, including the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, launched a search effort in the waters around Horn Island and the surrounding Gulf Coast area. For 2 agonizing days, Nolan's family waited for answers while search efforts continued. This is the part of the story that, understandably, resonates the most with people who have been following along. The idea of a family waiting, hoping, as searchers combed the water for their son. According to public reporting, Nolan's body was recovered 2 days after he went missing, found in the water near where he had last been seen. The discovery of his body confirmed the worst fears of his family and community, but it also opened up a new and even more complicated chapter of this case. The question of how he died, and why he had been left behind on that island in the first place. It's worth spending a moment on the setting of all this, because geography actually matters a great deal in this case. Horn Island is not a place with year-round residents, restaurants, or cell towers on every corner. It's a barrier island, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, largely undeveloped, reachable only by private boat, and popular precisely because of that remoteness. On a normal weekend, it draws boaters looking to anchor offshore, wade in shallow water, and spend a day away from the mainland. On the 4th of July, that traffic multiplies significantly, with dozens of boats anchoring along the shoreline, families and friend groups spread out across the sand, music playing, coolers open, fireworks sometimes visible over the water as evening falls. That popularity cuts both ways when it comes to this investigation. On one hand, a heavily trafficked holiday like the 4th of July means there could, in theory, be other boaters, other witnesses, and other people on or near the island who saw something relevant to what happened to Nolan that day, assuming investigators were able to identify and interview them. On the other hand, that same crowding, combined with the passage of time before Nolan was reported missing, makes reconstructing an exact, minute-by-minute account of the day considerably harder. Cell service around the island is inconsistent at best, meaning that even establishing a clean timeline of calls, texts, or photos from that day required investigators to piece together information after the fact, rather than being able to rely on a clear real-time digital trail. This detail matters because a lot of online commentary treats the absence of a perfectly clear timeline as evidence of a cover-up. It's worth remembering that even in cases with no wrongdoing at all, a chaotic holiday gathering on a remote barrier island, with limited connectivity and dozens of people coming and going, can easily produce a genuinely fuzzy account of exactly who was where and exactly when, without that fuzziness necessarily meaning anything sinister. Because so much of this case has come to revolve around a single phone call, it's worth explaining exactly what that call was and why it happened in the first place. Sea-Tow is a private, membership-based towing and assistance service for boaters, functioning in some ways like roadside assistance for the water. Boaters who run into trouble, engine failure, a boat taking on water, running aground, can call for help, and a Sea-Tow vessel will come out to assist, whether that means towing the disabled boat back to shore or providing emergency pumps to help keep a boat afloat. According to reporting, it was a call of exactly this nature that was placed from the boat carrying Nolan's friends as they made their way back from Horn Island, after the vessel began taking on water. In a moment like that, with water rising inside a boat, panic and urgency are entirely normal, and the resulting call is often loud, chaotic, and difficult to parse cleanly, multiple people potentially talking at once, wind and engine noise in the background, and the caller focused on communicating the emergency itself rather than speaking clearly for a recording that would later be picked apart online. That context is important because it helps explain why the original, unenhanced version of this call has been described as garbled and hard to make out. It wasn't recorded as evidence in a controlled setting. It was a real, live emergency call, placed by a teenager dealing with a boat that was taking on water in the middle of the Gulf. Understanding that origin doesn't resolve the debate over what the enhanced version does or doesn't contain, but it does help explain why the raw material itself was never going to be crystal clear in the first place. Throughout this case, Nolan's family has made repeated public pleas for information, and among the most emotionally resonant has come from Nolan's father, who has publicly called on those who were with his son that day to, in his words, be brave and give us the truth. That phrase has circulated widely across social media and true crime commentary, becoming something of a rallying point for people following the case who feel that answers are being withheld. It's a devastating thing to hear from any parent, a direct, public plea to the people his son considered his closest friends, essentially asking them to come forward with whatever they know, whatever that may be. Whether or not there is additional information those friends are withholding is not something we can determine from the outside, and it's important to be honest about that. But it's equally important not to lose sight of the human weight behind that statement. This is a father who buried his 18-year-old son and still, months later, does not have a confirmed answer for how he died. That reality sits underneath every headline, every viral clip, and every heated comment section discussion about this case, and it deserves to be acknowledged directly, not just referenced in passing. In the days immediately following the recovery of Nolan's body, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter addressed the case publicly. According to reporting, the sheriff stated that Nolan's friends were cooperating with investigators, and, critically, that at that point in the investigation, authorities did not suspect foul play. This statement has become one of the most contested and debated pieces of the entire case online. For a significant portion of the public that has been following this story, that initial statement, that foul play was not suspected, did not match the emotional weight of the situation. A young man dead after being left behind by his friends on a remote island. For others, it was simply investigators doing their job, following the evidence as it stood at that early stage, without jumping to conclusions. It's worth pointing out, because this matters for understanding how the case has evolved, that no foul play suspected is a fairly standard, procedural phrase that investigators use early in a death investigation, particularly before toxicology results, forensic analysis, and a full autopsy have been completed. It does not necessarily mean the case is closed, and it does not necessarily mean investigators have ruled out every possibility. According to later reporting, the Sheriff's Department has said that the investigation remains active and ongoing, even as few new details have been released publicly since those early statements. One of the most significant developments in this case, and one that has fueled a tremendous amount of public frustration, involves the autopsy. According to reporting, Nolan's family, through their attorneys, commissioned an independent, private autopsy, separate from whatever official examination may have been conducted by the state or county medical examiner's office. The results of that independent autopsy were reported as inconclusive regarding the cause of death. In other words, the private examination Nolan's family paid for did not produce a clear, definitive answer as to how he died. For a case that so much of the public wanted a clean answer to, this was, understandably, a deeply unsatisfying development. An inconclusive autopsy doesn't rule anything in, and it doesn't rule anything out. It leaves the door open to virtually every theory that has circulated online: accidental drowning, an undiagnosed medical event, or something more sinister. Compounding the frustration for many following the case is the fact that the official autopsy, the one conducted through the appropriate government channels, has reportedly been sealed, and according to the local district attorney's office, will remain sealed until a grand jury has the opportunity to review the evidence. Officials have described this as standard practice in Jackson County for cases that may eventually go before a grand jury, meaning it isn't necessarily an indication of anything unusual happening behind the scenes. But for a public already hungry for information, a sealed autopsy report reads, to many, as one more locked door in a case that already feels full of them. This is the point in the timeline where the case truly exploded across social media. With official information limited, an inconclusive private autopsy, a sealed official report, and a sheriff's department that had said little beyond its initial statement, the public, starved for concrete answers, turned to the only thing available, whatever photos, videos, and second-hand claims were circulating online. According to reporting on the case, social media users began combing through old posts, photos, and videos connected to Nolan and his friend group, looking for anything that might explain what happened. Theories multiplied. Some focused on the timeline of the boat trip itself. Others focused on relationships within the friend group. Still others zeroed in on inconsistencies, real or perceived, in statements friends had given publicly or to media outlets. It's worth pausing here to say something important about true crime cases in the internet era, because this case is, in many ways, a perfect example of a broader phenomenon. When an official investigation moves slowly, or when authorities are limited in what they can release publicly due to an active case, the public doesn't simply wait patiently. People search for their own answers. Sometimes that public scrutiny genuinely helps uncover new information or puts helpful pressure on investigators. But sometimes it also produces false narratives, misidentifications, and, as we're about to discuss, real and serious consequences for people who may have had absolutely nothing to do with a person's death. Given how much ground we've already covered and how many different threads are woven through this case, let's pause here and lay out the confirmed sequence of events as cleanly as we can, stripped of speculation, based purely on what has been publicly reported. On the 4th of July, Nolan Wells traveled to Horn Island with a group of friends for a holiday gathering. At some point that day, the group made the decision to return to the mainland, and Nolan reportedly did not travel back with them. During the return trip, the boat began taking on water, prompting one of the teenagers aboard to place a distress call to Sea Tow, a private towing and boater assistance service. That call was later obtained and, in its original form, has been described as difficult to understand clearly. Nolan was reported missing, and Jackson County authorities launched a search. 2 days after he was reported missing, his body was recovered from the water. The day after his body was found, Sheriff John Ledbetter stated publicly that Nolan's friends were cooperating with the investigation and that, at that point, foul play was not suspected. Nolan's family commissioned an independent, private autopsy, which was later reported as inconclusive regarding cause of death. The official autopsy has reportedly been sealed pending grand jury review, described by the local district attorney's office as standard procedure. 2 individuals connected to the case were charged with evidence tampering, reportedly for failing to report the incident and discarding items belonging to another individual. An enhanced version of the original distress call began circulating widely online, with some listeners claiming to hear specific phrases suggesting knowledge of Nolan's death. Attorneys for one of the friends named in online speculation have publicly disputed the authenticity of that enhanced audio, describing it as doctored. Death threats were reportedly directed at multiple friends connected to the case, prompting legal action, including a cease and desist letter sent to an online influencer. Federal authorities separately arrested a man accused of threatening a judge connected to the case. As of the most recent reporting, the investigation remains open, the grand jury review has not concluded, and no charges have been filed against any of Nolan's friends in connection with his death. Laid out this way, without the noise of social media reaction layered on top, you can see just how much of this case remains genuinely unresolved at the official level, even as the public conversation around it has, in many corners, already reached its own firm conclusions. Because the grand jury review has been mentioned repeatedly throughout this case, and because it's likely to be the next major turning point, it's worth taking a moment to explain what that process actually involves, since it's often misunderstood in online discussions of criminal cases. A grand jury is a group of citizens convened to review evidence presented by prosecutors in order to determine whether there is sufficient basis to move forward with formal criminal charges. It is not a trial. There is no cross-examination in the way you'd see in a courtroom trial, no defense attorney presenting a competing case in the room, and the proceedings themselves are typically conducted in private, with the results, an indictment or a decision not to indict, being what eventually becomes public rather than the detailed deliberations themselves. In the context of Nolan Wells' case, the fact that authorities have said the official autopsy will remain sealed until a grand jury reviews the evidence suggests that prosecutors intend to present the full body of evidence, including the disputed forensic findings, to that grand jury before any decision is made about whether charges are warranted. This is one of the reasons attorneys and legal commentators have repeatedly urged the public to wait for the outcome of that process rather than assuming an outcome based on incomplete information. It's also worth noting that a grand jury's decision not to bring charges doesn't necessarily mean no wrongdoing occurred. It means the standard of evidence required to move forward with formal charges was not met based on whatever was presented. Conversely, an indictment doesn't mean guilt. It simply means the case will proceed to trial, where guilt or innocence would ultimately be determined. Understanding this distinction is important because a lot of the current online debate treats the grand jury outcome as though it will provide a final, definitive answer to what happened to Nolan Wells. In reality, it's one procedural step with a specific and fairly narrow legal purpose, and it may or may not resolve the broader public uncertainty surrounding this case. As public attention around Nolan's death grew, the family retained high-profile civil rights attorney Ben Crump, a lawyer widely known for representing families in a number of nationally significant cases involving the deaths of Black individuals. Crump's involvement is significant, both because of his legal reach and because of the platform his involvement brings to a case. According to reporting, Crump has been vocal in press conferences and media appearances about the family's demand for transparency, describing what he sees as inconsistencies in the accounts given by the friends who were with Nolan, and raising concerns about aspects of the investigation. In one televised appearance, Crump pointed to Nolan's phone, reportedly retrieved from among his friends after his death, as, in his words, a suspicious element of the case that deserved closer scrutiny. Crump has also situated Nolan's case within a broader pattern he has publicly discussed, referencing a number of young Black men who have died under circumstances he considers similarly unclear and calling for the public not to look away. This framing has been a significant part of why the case has attracted such widespread national attention, well beyond what a regional missing person and death case might typically generate. At the same time, it's important to note that not everyone within Nolan's own friend group has agreed with the way the case has been publicly framed. One friend, identified in an ABC News interview as Shepard, who described himself as biracial, pushed back directly on the idea that the case should be framed primarily around race before the investigation has run its course. Shepard told reporters that he felt the public narrative had turned into something he described as people trying to spin a narrative that's not there, and asked for the investigation to be allowed to conclude before conclusions were drawn. We'll dig deeper into what Shepard and other friends have said in just a bit, because their public statements are a crucial and often overlooked part of this story. Now let's get into the piece of this case that has driven the most viral attention, the leaked audio recording that so many creators, including the one whose video title inspired today's episode, have been covering in detail. According to reporting, the origin of the audio traces back to that CTO call placed from the boat during the return trip from Horn Island, when the vessel began taking on water. That original recording was reportedly released by Mississippi Marine authorities as part of the public record connected to the emergency call. On its own, in its original, unenhanced form, the recording is reportedly garbled, difficult to understand clearly, consistent with what you'd expect from a distress call made over marine radio or phone during a stressful, chaotic moment on open water with wind, engine noise, and water in the background. Where things get complicated, and where the controversy truly begins, is with a version of that same audio that has circulated online described as enhanced. According to TMZ's reporting on the matter, listeners claim they can make out several phrases in the enhanced version, including something that sounds like, "Is he dead?" along with fragments including the name, Nolan, a phrase resembling, "check his chest," another resembling, "wake up," and, notably, what some listeners believe is the name, Bart. This enhanced audio, paired with a transcript that lays out what creators and commentators believe is being said, is what has driven an enormous portion of the online conversation and speculation around this case. For many following along, hearing what sounds like someone asking whether Nolan was dead, on a call made by his own friends during the boat trip back, felt like the missing piece of the puzzle, seemingly explosive evidence suggesting the friends knew far more about what happened to Nolan than they had said publicly. However, and this is critical to understanding where the case currently stands, this audio and its accompanying transcript are heavily disputed, and not just by casual observers. Russell Latino, the attorney representing one of Nolan's friends, Bart Edmiston Jr., the young man whose name some listeners claim to hear in the recording, has publicly and forcefully rejected the legitimacy of both the enhanced audio and the transcript that accompanies it. Speaking on NewsNation's Cuomo, Latino described the material as, in his words, a doctored recording paired with a fabricated transcript, calling it what he described as a kind of psychological exercise that leads people to hear specific words in what is otherwise unclear, garbled audio. This is an important concept, and one that digital forensics expert Robert Fried spoke about directly in a separate appearance on Jesse Weber Live. According to Fried, once a transcript is presented alongside a piece of ambiguous or low-quality audio, it becomes far easier for listeners to perceive specific words and phrases, even words that may not actually be present in the original recording, because the brain naturally tries to match sound to the words it has already been told to expect. Fried specifically pointed to the influence of media outlets like TMZ publishing their own claimed transcript alongside the audio as a factor that may be shaping what people believe they're hearing, rather than the audio itself being definitively clear on its own. In other words, and this is a distinction that matters enormously for anyone trying to understand this case honestly, there is a real, documented phenomenon in which people can be led to hear words in ambiguous audio simply because they've been told what to listen for. That doesn't necessarily mean the enhanced audio contains nothing of note, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's been faked either. It means that, as of now, the authenticity and actual content of that audio remains seriously disputed, with credible voices, including a digital forensics expert and a licensed attorney, pushing back hard against the version of events being spread across social media. According to more recent reporting, attorneys for Nolan's family have also weighed in, stating that independent experts would be brought in to formally review the boat distress call, in an effort to determine, through proper forensic analysis, what the recording actually does and does not contain. That review, as of the most recent reporting available, had not yet produced a publicly released, verified conclusion. Since so much of this case rests on a single piece of enhanced audio, it's worth taking a genuinely honest look at what audio enhancement actually does, and why experts like Robert Fried have raised concerns about how it's being used and interpreted in this specific case. Audio enhancement, in a legitimate forensic context, typically involves a combination of noise reduction, frequency filtering, and amplification, applied to a recording in an effort to make speech that's buried under background noise more intelligible. When done properly by a qualified forensic audio analyst, using established, peer-reviewed methodology, this process can genuinely help clarify speech that would otherwise be difficult or impossible to understand. Law enforcement agencies use forensic audio enhancement regularly, and when properly conducted and documented, it can hold up as reliable evidence. However, enhancement software and techniques can also introduce artifacts, meaning they can create or emphasize sounds that were not clearly present, or were ambiguous, in the original recording. This is especially true when enhancement is done using consumer-grade software rather than accredited forensic tools, and especially true when the person doing the enhancement already has an expectation of what they're listening for. This is precisely the concern Robert Fried raised. Once a transcript is published alongside a piece of ambiguous audio, telling listeners what to expect to hear, it becomes significantly easier for those listeners, and in some cases, for the person doing the enhancement itself, to perceive specific words that may not be clearly, objectively present in the original sound. This phenomenon has a name in psychology and audio analysis circles. It's sometimes referred to as auditory pareidolia, a close cousin of the more commonly known visual pareidolia, where people perceive faces or shapes in random patterns, like clouds or wood grain. With audio, the same basic mental process can cause people to perceive specific words or phrases in noise or unclear speech, particularly once they've been primed with a suggested transcript. This doesn't mean the enhanced Nolan Wells audio definitely contains nothing of note. It means that, without a properly conducted, independent forensic review, using accredited methodology and ideally without the analyst first being shown a suggested transcript, it's genuinely difficult to know with confidence whether the phrases people believe they're hearing are actually present in the recording or are, at least in part, a product of suggestion. This is exactly why Nolan's family's legal team has reportedly sought an independent expert review of the original call. A properly conducted forensic analysis, ideally conducted blind, without the analyst being shown the circulating transcript beforehand, would go a long way toward resolving this specific dispute, one way or the other. Because Bart Edmiston Jr.'s name is one of the phrases some listeners claim to hear in the enhanced audio, he has become one of the central figures in the public speculation, and as a direct result, one of the people who has faced the most severe real-world consequences from this case's viral spread. According to reporting, Edmiston, 21 years old, played football with Nolan in high school and was among the group on Horn Island on the 4th of July. Since the audio began circulating, Edmiston and his friends have reportedly received death threats, prompting them to retain legal counsel and, according to their attorney, to take formal legal action in response. Russell Latino, Edmiston's attorney, has been direct in describing the toll this has taken. In his NewsNation appearance, Latino stated plainly that his client and his client's friends are, in his words, in legitimate fear for their lives, adding that a large number of people online have assumed that the friends who loved Nolan and considered themselves his friends are somehow culpable in his death, based on what Latino maintains is unreliable, doctored material. Latino has also defended Edmiston's actions on the day in question, stating that his client fully cooperated with investigators from the very beginning of the case, and asserting that there is no evidence tying him to Nolan's death. According to Latino, Edmiston's only role aboard the boat during the incident was to help drain water after the vessel began taking on it, a detail directly relevant to the sea tow call at the center of the controversy. Beyond the audio itself, Edmiston has also reportedly faced online speculation connected to a viral photo showing him alongside a woman that some social media users speculated was romantically connected to both him and Nolan, an entirely separate thread of online speculation that Latino has said has no basis and has only added to the harassment his client has experienced. According to reporting, Latino sent a formal cease and desist letter to an online influencer identified as Kim Brawley, the same creator referenced in the title that inspired this very video, alleging that she had been publishing doxing content and false statements about Edmiston online. This detail is worth sitting with for a moment, because it speaks directly to the broader ethical questions swirling around how this case has been covered across social media and content platforms. A private individual, not charged with any crime connected to Nolan's death, is, according to his own attorney, receiving death threats and facing what his legal team characterizes as a targeted online harassment campaign, built substantially on a piece of audio that a digital forensics expert has suggested may not say what people believe it says. The seriousness of the threats connected to this case escalated well beyond social media commentary. According to reporting, federal authorities announced the arrest of a man from California accused of sending death threats to the Mississippi judge involved in aspects of Nolan's case, threats that reportedly included warnings about a bomb package and language promising violence. This development underscores just how far the emotional intensity of this case has spread, moving from heated comment sections and viral videos into what authorities treated as a credible federal threat requiring an arrest. It's a sobering reminder that when a case like this captures national attention, the consequences are not confined to the internet. Real people, friends of the victim, attorneys, and even judicial officials connected to the case have reportedly found themselves targeted by threats of violence stemming from a case where, as of now, the central facts remain unresolved and disputed. Amid all of the online speculation directed at Bart Edmiston Jr. specifically, other members of the friend group who were present on that 4th of July trip have also chosen to speak publicly, offering their own accounts of what happened and pushing back against the broader narrative that has developed online. One friend, identified in an ABC News report as Shepard, gave an on-the-record account, though he declined to appear on camera, citing safety concerns for himself and his family stemming from what he described as an ongoing wave of death threats since Nolan's body was recovered. Shepard told reporters that people have accused him and other friends of playing some role in Nolan's death, despite what he says is a lack of any solid evidence connecting them to it. Put all of that together, and you get exactly what we've seen play out with Nolan Wells' case: a genuinely tragic death, a family desperate for real answers, an investigation that has moved slowly and released limited information, and an online audience that has, in many cases, already decided what happened, sometimes based on evidence that credible experts say may not hold up under scrutiny. We would be doing this case a disservice if we didn't spend a moment talking honestly about what's at stake when speculation outpaces fact. On one side of this story, you have a grieving family who deserves real, verified answers about how their son died, answers they still don't have months into this case. On the other side, you have a group of young people, all of them still teenagers or barely into their 20s, who, according to their own attorneys, are now living under the weight of death threats and harassment campaigns, based substantially on a piece of audio that a digital forensics expert has suggested may be misleading listeners. Both of those things can be true at the same time. A family can be owed real transparency and accountability, and, simultaneously, individuals who have not been charged with any crime connected to a death can be entitled to not have their lives threatened based on unverified, disputed audio. Holding both of those truths at once is, frankly, harder than picking a side and running with it, but it's the only honest way to look at a case like this. Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a few practical questions worth asking anytime a piece of leaked evidence starts circulating in a case like this one, because these same dynamics come up again and again across true crime cases. Ask who originally released the material, and in what form. In this case, the original distress call came from an official source, but the enhanced version and its accompanying transcript did not, which is a meaningful distinction. Ask whether the people presenting the evidence have any relevant expertise, or whether they're simply presenting their own interpretation as fact. Ask whether anyone with a genuine, documented reason to defend their position, such as an attorney representing someone named in the material, has publicly disputed its authenticity, and if so, what specific reasoning they've offered. Ask whether official investigators or the family's own legal team have called for further, independent review, since that's often a sign that even people close to the case don't yet consider the matter settled. And finally, ask yourself whether a headline or title is designed to inform you or to provoke an emotional reaction that keeps you watching. Both can happen at once, but recognizing the difference matters. None of this means you should dismiss claims like the enhanced audio in Nolan Wells' case outright. It means holding them with the appropriate degree of uncertainty until they've been properly verified, rather than treating a viral clip as equivalent to a confirmed forensic finding or a court ruling. As this case continues to develop, there are a few specific things worth watching closely if you want to stay genuinely informed rather than just reacting to whatever clip goes viral next. First, keep an eye on the outcome of the grand jury review, since that process, once it concludes, could determine whether any charges are filed in connection with Nolan's death, and could also potentially result in the release of previously sealed information, including the official autopsy findings. Second, watch for the results of any formal, independent forensic review of the boat distress call audio. A proper expert analysis, conducted with established forensic audio methods, could go a long way toward resolving the current dispute over what that recording actually contains. Third, pay attention to any further legal action connected to the harassment and death threats reportedly directed at Nolan's friends, since those cases, if they proceed, could also surface additional information relevant to the broader story. And finally, and maybe most importantly, pay attention to the language used by the outlets and creators covering this case going forward. There's a meaningful difference between reporting that says, "sources allege," or "according to an attorney," and reporting that states something as flat, settled fact. In a case this unresolved, that distinction matters enormously, and it's one we've tried to be careful about throughout this entire video. At the time of this recording, Nolan Wells' family still does not have a confirmed, official cause of death for their son. They don't have a closed investigation. They don't have a grand jury decision. What they have is an independent autopsy that couldn't determine how he died, a sealed official report, a disputed piece of audio that has become the center of a national conversation, and a community, both online and offline, that remains deeply divided over what actually happened on that boat trip to Horn Island. What we can say, based on everything currently available in the public record, is this. Nolan Wells went out on the 4th of July with a group of friends he loved and who, by their own accounts and the accounts of people close to them, loved him back. He did not return with them. 2 days later, he was found dead. In the time since, an ambiguous piece of audio has become the center of a firestorm of speculation, accusations, threats, and competing legal claims. And, as of today, no one outside of investigators, and possibly the friends who were there that day, actually knows for certain what happened on that island and on that boat. That uncertainty is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for Nolan's family, who are still searching for real answers. It's uncomfortable for his friends, who say they're being accused of something they didn't do, based on evidence their attorneys say has been manipulated. And it's uncomfortable for anyone trying to follow this case honestly, because the internet doesn't reward uncertainty, it rewards conclusions, verdicts, and clean narratives. This case, at least for now, refuses to offer any of those things. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops, and if the grand jury review produces new, confirmed information, or if an independent forensic review of that audio recording is completed and released, we'll be back with an update, laying out exactly what has changed and what it means. Until then, the most responsible thing any of us can do, whether we're creators covering this case or viewers following along, is to keep a clear line between what has actually been confirmed and what remains, however compelling it might sound, still just a theory. Before we move to today's closing thoughts, we want to take a brief moment to talk about how we approach cases like this one on this channel, because it matters, especially in a case as sensitive and contested as this one. We are not investigators. We are not forensic audio experts. We do not have access to sealed autopsy reports or closed-door grand jury proceedings. What we have access to is public reporting, statements from attorneys on both sides, statements from law enforcement, and the same viral clips and audio that everyone else online has access to. Our goal in covering a case like this is not to tell you who is guilty and who is innocent. It's genuinely not our place to do that, and frankly, it isn't the place of any commentator, creator, or online sleuth without direct access to the full body of evidence. Our goal is to help you understand the full scope of what has actually been reported, sourced, and stated on the record, by name, by people directly involved in the case, the family's attorney, the friend's attorney, law enforcement officials, and the friends themselves, so that you can form your own informed opinion, rather than one shaped entirely by a single out-of-context clip or a viral thread built on assumptions. That's the responsibility we feel we owe to Nolan Wells, to his family, and to everyone else connected to this case, regardless of which side of the online debate they've found themselves on. A young man is dead. The family is grieving. A group of his friends say their lives have been upended by threats stemming from disputed evidence. All of that deserves to be treated with the seriousness and care it demands, not turned into content for the sake of engagement alone. Cases like Nolan Wells' death remind us why true crime, as a genre and as a community, carries real responsibility. It's easy to get swept up in a viral audio clip, a dramatic transcript, or a compelling theory. It's much harder to sit with genuine uncertainty, to acknowledge what we don't know, and to hold space for the fact that real people, on every side of a case like this, are living through the consequences of how these stories get told online. Nolan Wells deserves a full, honest investigation, and his family deserves real answers, not internet verdicts. At the same time, anyone who has not been charged with a crime deserves the presumption that comes with that, the presumption that unproven online accusations are not the same thing as established fact, no matter how viral they become or how convincing they might sound in a 15-second clip. We'll keep watching this case closely, and as always, we'll be back the moment there's a real, confirmed update to share with you. If this breakdown helped you actually understand the Nolan Wells case instead of just reacting to another viral clip, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a true crime update the moment real, verified information comes out, not just another theory. Drop a comment below and let us know what part of this case you want us to dig into next. We read every single one, and a lot of our upcoming episodes come directly from your suggestions. If you found this video valuable, give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you careful, fact-checked coverage instead of noise. Share this with someone who's been following the case but keeps getting fed half the story. And remember, this is Pioneer's Diary, so we'll always aim to bring you the facts first, the theories clearly labeled as theories, and the respect that real victims and real families deserve. See you in the next one.